The Ventriloquist and Scarface is an odd case of a Batman villain. The character, sure, he's pretty bizarre, but what I'm mainly referring to is his status. He does seem to be a fan favorite. The amount of people requesting him on this channel is proof enough of that. Yet at the same time, he's also constantly overlooked. Well, now it's time for this channel at least to shine the spotlight on the manic duo of Arnold Wesker and his dummy Scarface. Although, who's really the dummy around here? Of course, Arnold isn't the only ventriloquist. There's also Peyton Riley, the foxy femme fatale who became Scarface's new partner after Arnold died. Temporarily died, of course, it is comics after all. Then there's a completely different and unrelated character, a freaky woman named Shauna Belzer and her equally freaky dummy Ferdy. Neither of these ladies will appear on the list though. Only stories with Arnold will be featured. As let's get real, he's the only proper ventriloquist, and the other two were frankly completely unnecessary. Anyway, let's get started with the list. Number 5. The Secret Origin of Scarface. From Showcase 94, issues 8 and 9, published in 1994. The story was written by Alan Grant and John Wagner and penciled by Teddy Christiansen. As the title suggests, this is the origin story of how the dummy Scarface came to be, and also how he came into the possession of Arnold Wesker. Scarface was created by a Blackgate lifer named Donegan. Donegan was given a book on ventriloquism to pass the time in his cell, a subject he was utterly disinterested in at first, but eventually he picked it up and even began to learn how to throw his voice. Eventually he got so good, he figured it was about time he got himself a proper dummy. So, out of an old chunk of wood, he began creating his dummy in the prison workshop. However, this chunk of wood happened to be taken from the remains of the Blackgate gallows. The gallows were used for over 100 years to hang Blackgate inmates sentenced to death, until one stormy night when lightning struck it, completely destroying it. The remains of the gallows are said to be cursed. Nevertheless, Donegan uses it to create his dummy, whom he names Woody. Donegan and Woody soon become a popular act in the prison. However, it appears that the dummy is beginning to have a life of its own, speaking against its owner. Or is it just Donegan who's going stir crazy? The situation grows even more bizarre when Donegan is given a cellmate, Arnold Wesker, a meek, law-abiding man who happened to lose his temper once and killed a man in a bar. Woody soon turned his attention to Arnold, begging him to take him away from Donegan and help him escape. Yeah, it's pretty bizarre, let's just say that. I think you can all figure out how this one ends. And yes, it is Woody himself who later names himself Scarface, a far more fitting name in his opinion. This awesome Twilight Zone styled comic was the first to ask the question, what's really going on with Scarface? Is he actually alive? You can interpret it either way in this story. He could be alive, possessed by the souls of the gallows victims. Or it could very well be just two cons with mental issues. The only reason I don't rank this comic higher is because this isn't really the origin I'd done for the character. I'm not too crazy about the idea of someone else but Arnold creating Scarface. The dummy is supposed to be a conduit for his suppressed dark side after all. Having someone else create it kinda negates that. But overlooking that and viewing it as a mysterious Twilight Zone type of tale, it is really good. Number 4. The Return of Scarface. From Batman 475 and 476 and Detective Comics 642, all published in 1992. This 3-part story was written by Alan Grant and penciled by Norm Breyfogle and Jim Aparo. This is the second ventriloquist story ever made, and as the title suggests, in it, Scarface returns. The duo is released from Blackgate on a technicality. By the way, what the hell was Arnold doing in Blackgate and not in Arkham? He's clearly more insane than most Batman villains. Anyway, looking to resume their old criminal businesses, the duo and their ever-faithful enforcer, Rhino, find that their base of operations, the Ventriloquist Club, as well as all of their territories, have been taken over by the Street Demons. The Street Demons now run things, and to make sure it stays that way, they fill Scarface full of lead. And, Well, without his boss bossing him around anymore, Arnold has no reason not to retire. So together, Arnold and his pal Rhino leave their life of crime behind them. Arnold is as a result happier than ever, finally free of that domineering dummy and the violence it forced him to partake in. However, without Scarface, the ventriloquist also ends up kind of directionless, drowning himself in booze all day long. It doesn't take long before Scarface resurrects from the dead, much to the joy of Rhino, and seizes command of the group once again. Back and badder than ever, Scarface has only one thing on his mind: waste the street demons. So a story about the ventriloquist and Scarface in a gang war with the street demons is naturally a lot of fun. We get tons of great gangster action in this comic, which is enough on its own to grant it a spot on the list, but we also get a fascinating, albeit brief, glimpse into the binary mind of Arnold Wesker. This was before any hints that Scarface may actually be alive had been made, so at this point in the stories, it was definitely all in Arnold's mind. So in other words, Scarface's resurrection, which Arnold didn't really want, was still done by him. So just what is going on in that twisted mind of his? Fascinating stuff, and there are so many psychological theories you could come up with. Maybe he reluctantly realized he truly was nothing without Scarface. Or maybe he subconsciously actually wanted Scarface back. Or maybe he just can't help himself. Like I said, fascinating stuff. Number 3. Nightfall. Yeah, we all know what Nightfall is. It's the big 1993 arc published across all Batman titles, where the beast known as Bane broke free all the inmates of Arkham. Arnold Wesker were among these. By 93, he had wisely been admitted to Arkham instead of Blackgate. Wesker's storyline was published as a subplot running through issues of Detective Comics, all of these written by Chuck Dixon, while the pencils were handled by Norm Breyfogle and Graham Nolan. So, Arnold is set free along all the other loonies. However, he is without his Scarface, as the dummy was collected as evidence last time he was arrested. This causes Arnold's split personality to break up into multiple personalities. First, he uses one of his socks to substitute Scarface with, naming it Socko. With Socko and the aid of another Arkham inmate, Amygdala, Wesker breaks into a toy store. There he steals multiple dolls, creating additional personalities, including a duck and a policeman called Officer O'Hara. With the help of these new friends, Wesker goes on a quest to reacquire his boss, the lost Scarface. An absolutely hilarious arc. This is why Nightfall was so good. It wasn't just about the Batman vs. Bane fight. It was also about individual stories focusing on each of the escaped Arkham inmates. And most of these stories were pretty damn great. The ventriloquist part is definitely one of the greatest. Wesker's warped mind breaking up into multiple wacky personalities is comedy gold. It's also an interesting take on the character, proving he was nuttier than we ever knew. This arc also proved beyond doubt that there are no supernatural shenanigans going on with Scarface. Wesker creates these other personalities when Scarface isn't around after all. And if Scarface truly was alive, why didn't he somehow find a way to escape the police evidence room? Number 2. Fever Break, from Detective Comics 583 and 584, published in 1988. This two-parter was the character's very first appearance. It was written by John Wagner and Alan Grant, and penciled by Norm Breyfogle. So in it, the streets of Gotham are drowned in a new, highly dangerous drug called fever. Users of this drug are hit by a massive surge of adrenaline, basically causing them to go bonkers and do crazy shit. The police are powerless to stop the flow of fever, as what isn't smuggled in from South America is produced in labs protected like fortresses. However, when Batman discovers this drug, the pushers are in trouble, and so is the criminal mastermind responsible for the epidemic. One of the most bizarre crooks ever encountered by the Dark Knight. A ventriloquist dummy named Scarface, puppeteered by a meek ventriloquist named Arnold Wesker. So this comic was obviously meant as an allegory of the crack epidemic going on at the time. As such, it is a bit on the nose with its anti-drug message, and brings to mind reefer madness. Nevertheless, it's still great. It's a very basic story, Batman fighting drug dealers. But it works because of two things, the gritty tone and the villain. This was perhaps Batman at its most gritty 80s-ness. Gritty 80s Batman at its most grittiest 80s grit. You don't get more gritty 80s Batman than this, not even if you tried. You could try, but you would fail. Because Batman can't get more gritty 80s Batman than this. Anyway, then you have the villain, this really weird villain thrown into this gritty 80s Batman mix. And it just makes for a wonderful and amazing and awesome comic. It's a real classic too. I had this one myself in my younger days. Yep, a Swedish reprint as usual. So it will always be nostalgic and special for me. And now for the greatest Ventriloquist and Scarface story ever told. Number 1, a psychodrama. From Batman Scarface, a psychodrama, a one-shot graphic novel published in 2001. It was written again by Alan Grant and penciled by Charlie Adlard. In this one, Arnold Wesker goes through a radical form of therapy at Arkham Asylum. In order to finally rid himself of his evil persona, Dr. Arkham forces Wesker to get rid of Scarface. He has Wesker himself set the dummy ablaze and then send it off on a river. Now free of Scarface's influence, Wesker soon begins to rehabilitate and is eventually released. Creating a new dummy named Lola, he leaves his life of crime behind him and enters show business instead. With the help of his old friend Rhino, Wesker sets up their old headquarters, the Ventriloquist Club, as an actual ventriloquist club, with Wesker and Lola as the performers. They turn out to be a successful act too, attracting a big crowd every night. However, it doesn't take too long before the mentally unstable Wesker begins to suffer from nightmares and visions of Scarface returning. And what about Scarface himself? What happened to him? Well, he was eventually picked up and rescued by a pair of fishermen. The dummy then got passed along to various people, each one suffering some kind of misfortune, as a result of Scarface or just random coincidence. And what happens when the dummy finally finds itself in the flippers of the Penguin, the ventriloquist's bitter former rival? I don't think any other comic better illustrate the tragedy of Arnold Wesker. He's really not a bad man. Well, one side of him isn't. He's a decent man plagued by this other persona. This evil, twisted persona that basically forces itself on him. He doesn't want Scarface around, and he doesn't want to live the life of a violent criminal. He just wants to be a performer. But no matter what he does, Scarface always seems to find a way back to him. Arnold is cursed, not in a literal sense, but he's cursed to forever be shackled to this evil bully. I also want to point out that Rhino never makes anything better and is very toxic for Arnold. Rhino is always eager to have Scarface back after all, and pushes for their return to crime. He's a very bad influence and a bad friend, but I doubt he realized that himself, as he is a bit of a simpleton. As for the so-called supernatural aspects of this story, the curse that Scarface seemingly casts on all who come into possession of him, which really goes all the way back to Donegan, the man who created him, well, those are up for interpretation. Sure, it could be an actual curse, brought on by the souls of the gallows hanged men, but all these events could also be explained logically. It could just be morbid coincidence. I like that about this story, and the first one on the list. The supernatural is really only there if you want it to be. Nothing truly unnatural ever happens. And there you have it. Mr. Rogue's 5 favorite Ventriloquist and Scarface stories. I know this was a video many of you have wanted for a long time, so I hope it didn't disappoint. The Ventriloquist and Scarface sure is a great pair of characters. Psychologically fascinating and very entertaining. You gotta wonder though, why a story has never been made where the duo comes face to face with the Rogues Gallery's other split member. What a missed opportunity. Seems like these two, or these 4, would be a really interesting matchup. Anyway, as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.